I had barely set foot in my own house after 3 weeks visiting my sick sister in Florida when I heard the words that pierced my heart like sharpened daggers. "So glad you're back, Helen. Perfect timing to grab your things," Jessica shouted from the doorway of my house, the house I built with my own 2 hands over 30 long years. There she was, with that fake smile that had always given me a bad feeling, while my son David and her brother Kevin carried my furniture out as if it were just disposable junk. I stood frozen at the entrance, watching them haul away my favorite armchair, the one where I spent so many nights waiting for David to get home from his teenage shenanigans. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought I was going to have a heart attack right then and there. Jessica kept talking in that syrupy voice she used when she wanted to manipulate everyone. "Oh, Helen, it's about time you got here. David and I have been waiting for this moment to give you the news. We've decided this house is just too big for someone your age to live in alone. Imagine, 68 years old and living in a 3-story house. That's not safe for you." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. 68 years old, she said, as if I were some decrepit old woman who couldn't take care of herself. This woman, who had barely set foot in my house 5 years ago when she married my David, was now talking to me as if she owned the place. Kevin, that brother-in-law who had always struck me as a freeloader, came closer, carrying my television. "Don't you worry, Helen. We've already found the perfect place for you. It's a tiny little apartment, really cozy, near downtown. You'll be much better off there, without so many stairs to climb. And the best part is, it only costs $300 a month. David already spoke with the landlord, and he says you can move in tomorrow morning." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. $300 a month to live like I was being put out to pasture, when this house they wanted to take from me had cost me a lifetime of sweat. My David, my only son, the one I raised with so much sacrifice after his father abandoned us when he was just 5 years old, wouldn't even look me in the eye. He was busy taking apart my dining room table, the table where we celebrated his birthdays, where he did his homework throughout his childhood, where I cried so many times wondering if I was being a good mother. "Son," I said, my voice trembling, "what is going on here? Why are you moving my things without asking me?" "This is my house, David. The house I bought by working as a housekeeper in 5 different homes for 30 years. The house where you grew up and became a man." He finally looked at me, but his eyes weren't the same. It was as if Jessica had cast a veil over them, as if he were seeing me through her eyes. "Mom, we already talked about this. You can't keep living alone in such a big house. You're not young enough to maintain all this anymore. Jessica and I need space to start our family. She's pregnant. Mom, we're going to have a baby, and we need this child to grow up in a proper house, not that tiny apartment where we're living." Tears started rolling down my cheeks. Pregnant. My daughter-in-law was pregnant, and I was the last to know. And on top of that, they were kicking me out of my own home to make room for a baby that hadn't even been born yet. Jessica walked over to David and caressed his arm with that possessive attitude that had always bothered me. "Oh, honey, your mom's being emotional. It's normal at her age. But she'll be much better off in her new apartment, with no responsibilities, nothing to clean. She'll be able to rest, as she deserves after so much work." I looked around my living room, seeing the walls I painted one by one every weekend, the floors I polished with my own hands until they shone. I remembered when I bought this house, a modest 2-bedroom cottage that had cost $8,000 back then. I worked day and night to save up those first $2,000 for the down payment. I cleaned houses from 5 in the morning until 8 at night, sometimes without a break on weekends. My hands grew calloused, my back began to stoop, but every dollar I earned was another brick for our future, for David's future. For 10 years, I faithfully paid $400 a month to the bank, never missing a single payment. I remembered perfectly the day I paid off the mortgage. David was 15, and when I came home with the document that said the house was completely ours, I cried with joy, and he hugged me, telling me I was the best mom in the world. Then I invested another 20 years expanding it, building the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor, improving every corner. I made every improvement thinking that one day David would bring his wife here, and they would have enough space to raise my grandchildren. But now my own son was looking at me as if I were a nuisance, as if all my sacrifice had been for nothing. Jessica continued to direct the move as if she were the director of a play, and I was just a minor actor who needed to exit the stage. Kevin, go up and get the things from the second floor. David, help me disconnect the washing machine. Helen, if you have anything valuable you want to take, you'd better start setting it aside because the moving truck is coming early tomorrow morning. The moving truck is coming early tomorrow morning, Jessica repeated as she checked a list she held in her hand, as if she had been planning this for weeks. I just stood there, feeling the world crumble at my feet. I couldn't believe my own son was participating in this betrayal. David, I said, trying to stay calm, I need to talk to you alone. Please, come here. He looked at me impatiently, as if I were a petulant child interrupting the adults' games. Mom, there's nothing to talk about. We've made our decision. It's for the best for everyone. The best for everyone. Those words echoed in my head like funeral bells. When had my son stopped considering me part of that everyone? When had I become a burden, an obstacle to be removed from the path? Jessica came over and placed a hand on my shoulder with a false compassion that made me sick to my stomach. Helen, please understand this is nothing personal. It's just that you've done your part as a mother. Now it's time for you to enjoy your old age without any worries. We'll take care of the house, the expenses, everything. You just have to relax in your new apartment. Old age. That word hit me like a slap. I felt strong, capable, with many productive years ahead of me. There were women my age who ran marathons, who traveled the world, who started new businesses. But to Jessica, I was already a relic to be stored away in a small apartment, out of sight, like old furniture that no longer matches the new decor. I then remembered all the signs I had ignored over the past 5 years. Since Jessica came into our lives, she had begun a subtle but constant campaign to push me away from David. At first, it was seemingly innocent comments. Oh, Helen, it's a shame David has to come see you every Sunday. We barely get any time to ourselves. Or when I prepared family meals, she would say things like, poor Helen, she kills herself cooking for everyone. She shouldn't have to work so hard at her age anymore. Little by little, she managed to get David to stop coming on Sundays. Then the visits spaced out to every 15 days, then to once a month. Every time I called him, she had a perfect excuse. David was too stressed from work. David needed to rest on weekends. David was helping his brother-in-law Kevin with an important project. It was always David this, David that. But never David wants to come see his mom because he loves her. The plan had been perfect. While I was taking care of my sister Lydia, who had been in an accident and needed help with her recovery, Jessica had had 3 full weeks to work on my son's mind. 3 weeks to fill his head with ideas about my incompetence, my age, my supposed need for special care. 3 weeks to convince him that the house was too big for me, too expensive to maintain, too dangerous for a woman alone. Kevin now came downstairs with my bedroom mirror, that antique mirror that had belonged to my mother and was one of my most prized possessions. Be careful with that, I yelled, but he didn't even pay attention to me. Jessica quickly intervened. Don't worry, Helen. Kevin has a lot of experience moving furniture. He worked for a moving company for years. Your things will arrive at your new home in perfect condition. Your new home. As if a rented apartment could be my home after I had built this house brick by brick. As if I could call a place home where I would be a tenant paying rent at 68 years old, when I thought I had secured my future forever. Jessica continued talking as she supervised every move the men made. Besides, Helen, think of all the money you'll save. You won't have to pay property taxes anymore, which are like $500 a year, or maintenance, or repairs when something breaks. In the apartment, if a pipe bursts or a light bulb burns out, the landlord takes care of everything. $500 a year in taxes. The amount she mentioned as if it were a fortune represented less than 2 days of my monthly pension. For 30 years, I had paid those taxes without complaint, because I knew every payment was an investment in my future security. But now my daughter-in-law was talking about those $500 as if it were the difference between wealth and poverty. David appeared, carrying a box full of my books. Those books I had collected for decades. Novels that kept me company on lonely nights after his father left. Cookbooks I used to learn how to make his favorite dishes. Biographies of strong women who inspired me to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Son, I said, please, stop for a moment. I need you to explain what's really happening here. You know how much this house cost me. You know everything I sacrificed to give it to you one day. He put the box down with a sigh of annoyance. Exactly, Mom, to give it to you one day. Well, that one day has come. I'm your only heir. This house is going to be mine sooner or later. The difference is that now we're going to use it while we're young, while we can start a family here. It makes no sense to wait for you to die, for us to live decently. His words were like daggers plunging into my heart. It makes no sense to wait for you to die. My own son spoke of my death with the same casualness one speaks of the weather, as if my death were simply a pending formality, a minor obstacle in his plans for happiness. Jessica came up to him and stroked his back with a triumphant smile she couldn't completely hide. Exactly, honey. Besides, if something happens to Helen while she's alone in this big house, who's going to be responsible? In the apartment, she'll have neighbors nearby. She'll be more protected. She'll be able to walk to the market. She won't need a car for anything. It's much more practical for someone her age. Everything is designed for her well-being, even if she doesn't understand it now. I looked at my son, searching his eyes for any trace of the boy I had raised with so much love. The boy who cried in my arms when he had nightmares, the teenager who promised he would always take care of me, the young man who told me I was his hero and that he would never let me down. But that boy no longer existed. In his place was a man who looked at me with impatience, as if I were a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. But that boy no longer existed. In his place was a man who looked at me with impatience, as if I were a problem to be solved as quickly as possible. David, I said, my voice cracking. I still remember when you were 7 and you told me that when you grew up, you were going to build a house next to mine so you could always be close to your mom. Do you remember that, son? He avoided my gaze and continued packing my things as if he were a robot programmed for a specific task. Mom, that was when I was a kid. Kids say a lot of silly things. Now, I'm a married man, and I have other responsibilities. Other responsibilities. As if I hadn't been his first responsibility for 23 years. As if raising a son on my own hadn't been the biggest responsibility of my life. Jessica approached again with that condescending smile I was sick of. Oh, Helen, don't be so sentimental. Children grow up and start their own families. It's the law of life. You've done your part as a mother. Now let him do his part as a husband and future father. Do his part as a husband. Those words sounded as if David were an actor in a play directed by Jessica, where I had been relegated to the role of an unimportant extra. Kevin appeared again, this time carrying my sewing machine. The machine I had used to make David's school uniforms throughout his childhood, to sew curtains for every window in this house, to earn extra money by mending clothes for the neighbors when money was tight. Hey, Kevin, I said, be careful with that machine. It's very delicate and worth a lot of money. He laughed contemptuously. Helen, this relic is useless now. Nowadays, clothes are bought ready-made. Nobody wastes time sewing. But don't worry. In the apartment, you'll have more space without so much old junk in the way. Old junk in the way. Every object in this house had a story, a memory, a reason for being. But to them, my entire life had become mere clutter that needed to be cleared out to make room for the new, the modern, what really mattered. Jessica was now rummaging through my kitchen cabinets, pulling out my pots and pans as if she were an inspector evaluating what was worth saving and what should be thrown away. Helen, these pots are so worn out. In the new apartment, David and I will buy you a whole new set, modern, non-stick. You'll find it much easier to cook. Besides, for one person, you don't need so many pots. 2 or 3 is more than enough. I looked at her in disbelief. Those pots had prepared thousands of meals for David. They had been my faithful companions through decades of cooking with love for my family. But to Jessica, they were just junk to be replaced. As I watched them dismantle my life piece by piece, I began to remember all the times Jessica had shown her true colors when she thought no one was watching. The time I found David crying after an argument with her, and when I asked what had happened, he told me Jessica had said I was a manipulator who wouldn't let him grow up to be a man. Or the time I accidentally overheard her on the phone telling someone I was a bitter old woman who clung to her son because she had no life of her own. I also remembered the day David came home with bruises on his arm, and when I asked what happened, he lied and said he had fallen. But I had seen those kinds of marks before on other women I cleaned houses with. Women who came to work trying to hide bruises and who made up increasingly elaborate excuses to explain their injuries. However, when I tried to talk to David about my suspicions, he got so angry with me that he stopped speaking to me for 2 weeks. Jessica had managed to isolate David not only from me but from all his childhood friends, his cousins, from all the family who might have noticed the changes in his personality. Little by little, she had turned him into a stranger, someone who no longer resembled the son I had raised. And now I was seeing the final result of that manipulation. A man who was capable of kicking his own mother out of her house without the slightest remorse. David went back up to my room and started emptying my drawers. "Mom, there's a lot of stuff here you don't need anymore. Old letters, photographs, memories that just take up space. You'll have very little storage in the apartment, so you'd better start choosing only what's essential." I ran up the stairs after him. "David, those aren't old things. Those are your letters, pictures of you as a baby, from your first communion, your graduation. It's our family history." He looked at me with that coldness that chilled my blood. "Mom, the past is the past. Now I have to think about the future, about my wife, about my child who's on the way. I can't carry around sentimental junk my whole life that holds me back. Jessica is right when she says you live too attached to memories." Jessica is right. That phrase had become my son's favorite refrain over the last few years. No matter what topic we were discussing, it always ended with those 3 words that canceled out any opinion of mine, any experience I might bring, any advice I wanted to give. Jessica is right when she says you spend too much money on food. Jessica is right when she says this house is too big for you. Jessica is right when she says you need to exercise more. Jessica was always right, and I was always wrong. Kevin appeared in the room carrying an empty box. "Helen, you can put the things you really want to take in here. But remember, the apartment is small, so don't get too carried away." I looked at that box, which could hold barely a fraction of a lifetime's worth of memories, and felt a profound despair. How is it possible that 68 years of existence could fit into a cardboard box? I went back downstairs to the living room and found Jessica directing the operation like a general on a battlefield. She had made a detailed list of all the furniture and was assigning destinations for each piece. The big sofa goes in the main living room, the dining chairs go in the dining room, the big TV goes in our bedroom. Everything was planned. Everything had its place in her new life, in the life they were going to build on the ruins of mine. I sat on the stairs and watched as my house was transformed into a strange, empty place, stripped of everything that had made it a home for so many years. It was like watching my existence being erased with a giant eraser, eliminating any trace that I had lived there, that I had been happy there, that I had built dreams and memories in every corner of that house. Jessica approached me with that false compassion I knew so well. "Helen, I know this is hard for you, but think of all the positives. You'll meet new people in the building. You'll have fewer responsibilities. You'll be able to travel without worrying about the house. It's like starting a new life. A new life at 68, without my own home, without savings because I had invested everything in this property, without a family because my only son had betrayed me. What kind of new life was that? What kind of new life was that? A life where I would have to start from scratch, when I thought I had already secured my future forever." Jessica continued with her motivational speech, as if she were a salesperson trying to convince me to buy something I didn't need. "Besides, Helen, think about your grandchild. When he's born, he's going to need a stable home, with young parents who can raise him properly. You'll be able to visit him whenever you want. You'll be a wonderful grandmother without the pressures of maintaining such a big house. Visit him whenever I want, as if I were a stranger asking for permission to see my own grandchild. As if my role in that baby's life was that of an occasional guest, not the grandmother who had dreamed of taking care of him, of teaching him the same songs I sang to David, of telling him the same stories I had made up for my son when he was little. Now all of that would depend on Jessica's generosity, on her mood, on her willingness to let me be a part of my grandchild's life. David came downstairs carrying my jewelry box, that small wooden box where I kept the few pieces of jewelry I owned. The engagement ring his father had given me that I never had the heart to sell despite his abandonment, the pearl earrings I bought for myself when I finished paying off the house, the gold chain that had belonged to my mother. "Mom," he said, looking through the contents, "this jewelry is so outdated. Jessica says that when the baby comes, it would be better if you sold it and bought something more modern for the child. Clothes, toys, useful things." Jessica says, again that phrase that had become the new constitution of my family. Now it turned out my daughter-in-law had opinions about my jewelry, about what I should do with the few valuables I had left. And my son, instead of defending me, had become the messenger of these orders disguised as suggestions. "Son," I said, trying to stay calm, "that jewelry has a sentimental value that can't be measured in money. They are mementos of important moments in my life." He sighed impatiently. "Mom, sentimental value doesn't feed a baby. When my son is born, he's going to need concrete things, not dusty old memories. You've always been too attached to material things. It's time you learn to let go of what isn't essential." Attached to material things. My son was accusing me of materialism when my entire life had been an example of austerity and sacrifice. Every dollar I spent for 30 years had a purpose. To build a future for him, for us. I never bought expensive clothes, never indulged in luxuries, never spent money on frivolities. Kevin appeared with another box full of my cookbooks and photo albums. "Helen, these books are all yellowed and stained. Everything's on the internet these days. You can look up any recipe on your phone. And these photos, you should just digitize them and save everything on a flash drive. It takes up less space, and it's more modern." I looked at those albums that I had put together with such care over decades, each photo glued in with painstaking effort, each moment documented with love. But to Kevin, they were simply obsolete objects to be modernized or eliminated. Jessica came over and began flipping through one of the albums. "Oh, Helen, those were the days when people printed out all their photos. Look at you and David in this picture. So different. So humble, you could say. But look how much David has changed now that he's with me. He looks more elegant, more successful, more mature. The love of a good woman can completely transform a man. The love of a good woman, as if the 23 years I dedicated to raising David hadn't been love, as if everything I accomplished on my own, without anyone's help, was less valuable than what she had contributed in 5 years. Jessica turned the pages of the album with that dismissive smile that was pushing me to the edge of my patience. "Oh, and this picture from David's high school graduation. It's a shame he couldn't go to a private university. But well, you do what you can with the resources you have, right, Helen?" The resources I had. A single mother working as a housekeeper raising a son didn't exactly have an abundance of resources. Yet, I managed to get David into good public schools, to make sure he had books, clean uniforms, and nutritious food every day. I managed to ensure he never lacked anything essential, even if it meant I had to give up everything. But now Jessica was talking about those achievements as if they were failures, as if not being able to afford a private university was a mark of my incompetence as a mother. David returned with more boxes and started filling them with my personal belongings without any particular care. "Mom, you have too much stuff. You won't have room for all this in the apartment. You'd better make a real selection of what you truly need. Jessica says that after 70, it's best to live with the bare minimum. It's more hygienic and mentally healthier." After 70, my son was already burying me alive, talking about me as if I were a senile old woman who needed others to decide what was good for her. And again, he quoted Jessica as if she were an expert in gerontology, when she was barely 28 and had never faced any real-life challenges. "Son," I said, "I'm not 70. I'm 68, and I feel perfectly capable of deciding what I need and what I don't." He looked at me with that expression of annoyance that had become so common in our conversations. "Mom, 2 years makes no difference. The point is, you're not at an age to manage such a big house anymore. Jessica has been researching these things, and she says people over 65 should live in smaller, more manageable spaces. It's for your own safety." Jessica has been researching. My daughter-in-law had become an expert on my life, my needs, on what was best for me. While I was taking care of my sick sister, she had been doing research on how to get rid of me in the most efficient way possible. The plan had been perfect. Wait for me to be out of the house long enough to convince David that I was a burden, a problem that needed to be solved. Kevin came up again, and this time he came down with my bedroom dresser. That antique dresser I had restored myself, sanding and painting it over several weekends. Helen, this dresser is in pretty bad shape. In the apartment, David and Jessica are going to buy you new modern furniture that will better suit your new phase of life. I watched them carry my dresser and remembered all the nights I had spent sanding it, all the coats of paint I had applied until it was perfect, all the love I had poured into restoring it. But that love, that effort, that time invested meant nothing to them. To Jessica, Kevin, and apparently David as well, my previous life was simply an obstacle to be removed to make way for the new, the modern, what really mattered. It was as if they had decided my existence had an expiration date, and that date had arrived. Jessica was now going through my kitchen drawers, selecting which utensils deserved to be saved and which should be discarded. Helen, these knives are so dull, and this mixer must be 20 years old. You won't need so many things to cook with in the apartment. A single person doesn't make elaborate meals. The basics are enough. A single person. That's how they saw me now. A single person, isolated, with no real family to care about her. But I hadn't felt alone all these years. This house had been full of life, memories, projects. I had my routines, my activities, my small daily joys. I tended my garden, I cooked for neighbors when someone was sick, I helped at the church organizing community events. My life had been full of purpose and meaning. But now all of that was reduced to a single person who no longer needed such a big house. But now all of that was reduced to a single person who no longer needed such a big house. David appeared carrying my bathroom mirror, the mirror where I had looked at myself every morning for 30 years, where I had watched my youth and middle age pass, where I had practiced smiles to hide tears when times were tough. Mom, the bathroom in the apartment already has a built-in mirror. This one is all scratched and outdated. Besides, Jessica says that large mirrors make small spaces look even smaller. Jessica says, the ultimate authority on decor, psychology, gerontology, and everything else concerning my life. My daughter-in-law had become the universal expert with an answer for every aspect of my existence, while I, who had lived 68 years learning from life, apparently knew nothing about anything. It was incredible how a 28-year-old woman, who had never faced true hardship, had set herself up as the authority on what was best for a woman who had raised a son on her own and built a house with her own hands. At that moment, my neighbor Sharon peered through the front door. She had noticed all the activity and came to find out what was going on. "Helen, what's all this commotion? Are you moving?" she asked with her characteristic friendly curiosity. Sharon was 75. She was a widow and had been living alone in the house next door for over 20 years. We had developed a solid friendship based on mutual support, afternoon chats in the garden, and unconditional help in difficult times. Jessica answered before I could open my mouth. "Oh, Mrs. Johnson, so glad you came by." "Yes, we're helping Helen move into a more comfortable apartment for her. She's getting too old to maintain such a big house. You, having more experience, surely understand how hard it is for people of a certain age to live alone in such big, dangerous houses." Sharon looked at me with surprise and then sized up Jessica with that penetrating gaze that older people develop to spot liars. "Dangerous? This house doesn't seem dangerous at all. Helen keeps it immaculate. Besides, she's barely 68. I'm 75, and I live perfectly fine on my own. I don't see why she couldn't do the same." Sharon's intervention seemed to make Jessica uncomfortable. She hadn't expected anyone to question her narrative about my supposed frailty. "Well, Mrs. Johnson, every case is different. Helen has already expressed her desire to move to a quieter place, with fewer responsibilities. We're just respecting her decision and helping her with the process." I expressed my desire. That blatant lie, told with such natural ease, left me momentarily speechless. Sharon looked me directly in the eyes, searching for the truth she knew she wasn't hearing. "Helen, is that true? You want to move?" Her tone clearly indicated she knew the answer, but she wanted me to say it out loud, to give me a chance to defend my side of the story. I looked at David, hoping he would tell the truth, that he would admit this move wasn't my idea. But he avoided my gaze and continued packing as if the conversation didn't concern him. It was incredible to see how my own son had developed the ability to ignore reality when it didn't suit his plans. "Sharon," I finally said, "this move was not my idea. I came home from taking care of my sister and found that they had already decided my future without consulting me." Jessica became visibly uncomfortable and tried to downplay my words. "Oh, Helen, don't be so dramatic. We're just thinking of your well-being. Besides, you always say your back hurts from going up and down the stairs. You'll be much more comfortable in the apartment." Sharon looked at her with an expression that older women reserve for arrogant young people who think they know more about life than they actually do. "Young lady," she said in a tone that allowed no argument, "I have stairs in my house too, and my back hurts sometimes as well. That doesn't mean I need someone else to decide where I should live. Helen is a perfectly capable woman who can make her own decisions. If she says she doesn't want to move, then she shouldn't move." David finally intervened, clearly annoyed by Sharon's interference. "Mrs. Johnson, with all due respect, this is a family matter. We know my mother's situation better than anyone. You don't need to get involved in our problems." Sharon looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and reproach. "David, I watched your mother arrive in this neighborhood 30 years ago. I've seen her work like a dog to give you everything you needed. It seems very strange to me that now, when she needs you to respect and care for her, you're kicking her out of her own house." Sharon's words hung in the air like a court sentence. It was exactly what I had been thinking but couldn't express with such clarity. My neighbor, with her outsider's perspective, had managed to sum up the entire injustice of the situation in a few sentences. David turned red with anger, but couldn't deny the truth of what she had said. Kevin, who had been listening to the conversation from the stairs, came down and approached Sharon with a threatening posture. "Ma'am, you don't know what you're talking about. This family has made a decision and doesn't need advice from strangers. I suggest you mind your own business and let us handle ours in peace." Sharon was not the least bit intimidated. On the contrary, she drew herself up with all her elderly dignity and replied firmly, "Young man, I am not a stranger. I've been Helen's neighbor for over 20 years. I've watched her struggle, work, and sacrifice for her son. I have every right to voice my opinion when I see such a great injustice." Jessica tried to smooth over the tension with her usual tactic of fake sweetness. "Mrs. Johnson, we understand your concern, but you really don't know all the details of the situation. Helen has been very depressed lately, very lonely, very sad. The apartment will give her the opportunity to socialize with other people her age, to have scheduled activities, to not feel so isolated. Depressed, lonely, sad." Jessica was inventing a completely false version of my emotional state to justify her actions. Sharon knew me well enough to know that those descriptions didn't match my personality or my real situation at all. "Helen, depressed? But you're one of the most active people in the neighborhood. You're always helping someone, always have projects, always busy with something productive." "Exactly," I replied, feeling for the first time all day that someone was defending me. "Sharon, I'm not depressed or lonely or sad. I'm being forced to leave my home because my daughter-in-law wants to take it over and has convinced my son that it's the best option for everyone. But nobody asked me what I wanted." David finally exploded. "That's enough, Mom. I'm not going to let you turn this into a public drama. Mrs. Johnson, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private family matter. My mother will be much better off in the apartment, and that's final. There's nothing more to discuss." Sharon looked at him with a deep sadness. "David, I remember when you were a little boy, and you would come to my house to borrow tools to help your mother with repairs around the house. You always said that when you grew up, you would take care of your mom just like she took care of you. What happened to that boy, David? What happened to those promises?" Sharon's words hit David like a slap. For a moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a moment of reconnection with his former self, with the values I had taught him. But Jessica quickly moved in and took his arm possessively. "Honey, don't let them manipulate you with sentimentality. You've already made the right decision. Now you have to stand firm and think about our future, about our baby." And just like that, once again, Jessica managed to extinguish any spark of conscience that might have ignited in my son. Sharon looked at me with understanding and whispered in my ear, "Helen, if you need anything, any help at all, don't hesitate to knock on my door. This isn't over. This isn't over." Sharon's words echoed in my mind like a promise of hope in the midst of this nightmare. For the first time all day, I felt that I wasn't completely alone, that someone else could see the injustice being done to me. After Sharon left, Jessica looked at me with a smile that failed to hide her irritation at my neighbor's interference. "Helen, I hope you're not going to create unnecessary problems. We already have everything organized, and it would be a shame if we had to complicate things because of gossip from nosy neighbors." Gossip from nosy neighbors. That's how Jessica classified the only voice that had risen in my defense all day. To her, anyone who questioned her decisions was automatically a meddler, a gossip, someone who didn't understand the situation. It was incredible how she had managed to create a bubble around David where only her version of reality was valid. David continued packing my belongings with a mechanical efficiency that broke my heart. It was as if he had completely disconnected his emotions, as if he were a stranger hired for a move and not the son I had raised with so much love. Kevin came up again, and this time he came down with my desk. That small desk where I had paid all the house bills for 30 years, where I had helped David with his homework, where I had cried silently on the most difficult nights. "Helen, this desk is really old and scratched," Kevin said as he carried it towards the door. "You won't have room for so much furniture in the apartment. Besides, everything is done on the computer these days. You don't need desks anymore to write letters or pay bills." I looked at that desk that had been my faithful companion for decades and felt as if pieces of my soul were being torn away. Jessica approached with a folder in her hand and began to show me some papers. "Look, Helen, I have all the information about the apartment here. It's only $400 a month, including water and electricity. David already paid the first month and the security deposit. The lease is in his name, so you don't have to worry about the legal paperwork." That sentence sent a chill down my spine. Not only were they taking my house, but they were also making me completely dependent on David. Without a lease in my name, with no rights as a tenant, with no legal security, if David decided to stop paying the rent, I would be out on the street with no recourse. It was the perfect plan to keep me controlled and submissive forever. "David," I said, "I need to talk to you about that lease. If I'm going to live in that apartment, the lease needs to be in my name. I have a right to legal security in my housing." He looked at me impatiently. "Mom, don't complicate things. It's better if it's in my name so I can handle all the payments directly. You don't have to worry about anything. Just move in and live peacefully. Just move in and live peacefully." As if it were that simple, as if giving up all my rights was an act of liberation. "Son," I said, "I have my pension. I can pay my own rent. I don't need you to support me as if I were a helpless child." He looked at me with that condescending expression he had learned from Jessica. "Mom, your pension is very small, barely $700 a month. That's not enough to pay for rent, food, medicine, and personal expenses. It's better if I take care of everything. $700 a month." My pension, the result of 30 years of honest work, was now being dismissed as very small by a son who had never had to manage a tight budget. For years, I had lived comfortably on that pension because my house was paid off and my expenses were minimal. But now that they were forcing me to pay rent, suddenly my money wasn't enough, and I needed to depend on my son's charity. Jessica intervened with her calculated smile. "Exactly, Helen. Besides, when the baby is born, there will be a lot of extra expenses. David won't be able to pay for your apartment and support a family at the same time. It's better if we organize everything practically and realistically from the start. Support a family at the same time." Jessica had managed to make David see me as an additional financial burden, an unnecessary expense that competed with the needs of his new family. 30 years of investing every cent in my son's future, and now I was the obstacle to his economic stability. Kevin returned with more empty boxes and began packing my books carelessly. "Helen, these books are all yellowed and smell musty. In the new apartment, it's better to keep everything fresh and clean. Old books attract dust mites and can cause respiratory problems." My books, Those companions that had been with me through lonely nights were now classified as a health risk. At that moment, David's phone rang. It was Mark, a family friend who was also a lawyer. David answered with some discomfort, probably knowing that Mark wouldn't approve of what he was doing. "Mark, hey, how are you?" "Yeah, we're here at my mom's house, helping her with a move." There was a long pause as Mark spoke on the other end of the line. David became visibly nervous. "No, it's not exactly like that. It's just that my mom can't maintain such a big house anymore. It's for her own good." Mark must have been asking some tough questions because David started pacing in circles as he talked. "No, she's not sick." "Well, not exactly sick, but she's getting on in years," and Jessica approached David and gestured for him to end the call quickly. "Look, Mark, we're really busy right now. I'll call you later, okay?" After hanging up, David looked clearly disturbed. Jessica immediately went to comfort him. "Honey, don't let other people's opinions get to you. Mark doesn't live this situation. He doesn't know all the details. You're doing the right thing for your family. You're doing the right thing for your family." Again, that phrase that automatically excluded anyone who wasn't David, Jessica, and the unborn baby. I had ceased to be family. I had been demoted to the status of a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. At that moment, I remembered something that filled me with a strange mixture of hope and dread. 6 months ago, when we were still on cordial terms, Jessica had asked me to lend her $5,000 to help Kevin with a business he was starting. I, trying to keep the family peace and show my goodwill towards my daughter-in-law, had lent her the money without asking her to sign any papers. I now realized that loan had never been mentioned again, as if the money had vanished from everyone's memory. "Jessica," I said, taking advantage of a moment when David was busy carrying a box, "I need to talk to you about the $5,000 I lent you 6 months ago. With this whole situation changing, I need you to pay me back so I can get settled in the apartment." She looked at me with genuine surprise, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. $5,000, Helen? I don't remember any $5,000 loan. Are you sure you're not confusing the amounts? Sometimes older people tend to exaggerate numbers or misremember figures. Older people tend to misremember. Jessica was suggesting I was suffering from memory problems, that I had invented or exaggerated the loan amount. "Jessica," I said firmly, "I withdrew that money from my savings account specifically to lend it to you. It was in March, on a Friday afternoon. You told me Kevin needed the money to buy tools for his construction business." She paused for a moment, as if trying to remember. "Oh yes, I think I know what you're referring to, but Helen, that wasn't a loan. That was a gift you wanted to give Kevin to support his business. You said it yourself, that it was your contribution to help the family." A gift. Jessica had transformed my loan into a gift, erasing my right to get that money back in one fell swoop. The ease with which she rewrote history to suit her own convenience was astounding. David returned just then and overheard part of the conversation. "What gift are you guys talking about?" he asked curiously. "What gift are you talking about?" David asked with curiosity. Jessica was quick to answer before I could explain the real situation. "Oh, honey, your mom was just remembering when she helped us with money for Kevin's business. She was so generous to us. But now it seems she regrets her generosity and wants us to pay it back." Regrets her generosity. Jessica had once again managed to completely distort the facts, painting me as a petty woman who was going back on a charitable act. David looked at me with disappointment. "Mom, I can't believe you now want to charge us for money you gave us as a gift. That's not right. A gift is a gift. You can't take it back." "Son," I said desperately, "it wasn't a gift. It was a loan. I lent Jessica $5,000 on the condition that she would pay me back when Kevin's business started making a profit." David shook his head, clearly convinced by his wife's version. "Mom, Jessica wouldn't lie about something like that. Besides, $5,000 is a very specific amount for a gift. If it had been a loan, you would have asked us to sign some papers. That had been my exact mistake. Trusting the word of family, believing that among us it wasn't necessary to formalize agreements with legal documents. Now that trust had become my downfall." Jessica smiled with satisfaction, knowing she had won another battle in the silent war she had been waging against me for years. Kevin came downstairs at that moment, carrying my old sewing machine, and overheard part of the conversation. "What are you talking about?" he asked with that feigned innocence I had learned to recognize. Jessica quickly explained the situation, presenting me as a woman trying to reclaim money she had generously gifted. Kevin put on an exaggerated expression of surprise. "Helen, I thought that money was a gift from you. You told me yourself that you wanted to support my business because I was like a son to you. If I had known it was a loan, I never would have accepted. Besides, that money has already been fully invested in tools and materials. There's no way to pay it back now. Like a son to you." Kevin was using my own words against me, twisting the context in which I had said them. When I gave him the money, I had indeed told him I considered him like a son. But that was an expression of affection to make the loan less formal, not a declaration of adoption that waived my right to recover my money. David came over and placed a hand on my shoulder with a condescension that hurt more than any shout. "Mom, I think you're confused. The stress of the move has you upset, and you're misremembering things. It's normal at your age. That's why it's better for you to have fewer responsibilities and worries. The stress of the move has me upset. My own son was suggesting I was suffering from mental confusion, that my memory was no longer reliable. It was the perfect strategy. Any claim I made could be dismissed as a product of senility or confusion. That way, they could rewrite history to their convenience without fear of contradiction." Jessica seized the moment to elaborate on that narrative. "David is right, Helen. I've noticed you've been very forgetful lately. The other day you couldn't remember where you put your house keys, and last week you forgot to turn off the stove. These are signs that you need special care, not additional responsibilities like managing money or contracts. Forgetful." Jessica was building a case for my supposed mental decline based on minor incidents that happen to anyone of any age. Losing keys or occasionally forgetting to turn off the stove were not symptoms of dementia, but in my daughter-in-law's mouth, they became evidence of my inability to live independently. The phone rang again, and this time David had no choice but to answer because he saw Mark's name on the screen. Apparently, his lawyer friend had been doing some research or making some inquiries and had more questions. David answered with clear reluctance. "Hey, Mark. No, we're not doing anything illegal. It's a consensual family decision." Consensual. David was blatantly lying to his lawyer friend, claiming I had participated in the decision to move when the reality was the complete opposite. Jessica went over to David and whispered something in his ear, clearly trying to influence what he should say. David nodded and continued the phone conversation. "Look, Mark, my mom can't live alone anymore. She's had several episodes of confusion and forgetfulness. We're acting in her best interest. Episodes of confusion and forgetfulness." Now David was creating a false medical history about my mental condition to justify his actions to his lawyer friend. It was incredible to see how the lie grew and became more sophisticated with each conversation. After hanging up, David looked clearly uncomfortable. Mark had asked questions he didn't have satisfactory answers for, had posed legal scenarios he hadn't considered. Jessica immediately went to reassure him. "Honey, don't let Mark fill your head with doubts. He doesn't understand the situation because he doesn't live with us. He doesn't see how difficult everything has become with your mom. How difficult everything has become with me." In Jessica's narrative, I had become an impossible burden to handle, a problem that required drastic solutions. But the reality was that for the past 5 years, since she came into our lives, David's visits had become increasingly scarce and tense. It wasn't that I had become more difficult, but that she had succeeded in creating a barrier between my son and me. Kevin returned with another box full of my belongings and approached Jessica. "Sis, we're almost done with the second floor. Just the master bedroom left." Jessica nodded with satisfaction. "Perfect. The truck comes early tomorrow, and in a few hours, Helen will be settled in her new apartment. Everything will be so much easier for everyone. Everything will be so much easier for everyone." That phrase perfectly summed up Jessica's philosophy. Eliminate any obstacle that complicated her path to happiness, regardless of the human cost of those decisions. I was the obstacle, and my removal from the house was going to make everything easier for them. David went back up to my room and started emptying the last closet. When he came down, He was carrying a box with my personal documents, deeds to the house, property titles, insurance policies, my parents' birth and death certificates. "Mom," he said, "I'm going to keep these documents at my house so they're safe. You might lose them or have them stolen in the apartment. You might lose them or have them stolen." David was confiscating my legal documents under the pretext of protecting them, but in reality, he was cutting off my access to the papers that proved my ownership of the house and my other legal rights. Without those documents, I couldn't prove to any authority that this house was legally mine. "Son," I said, "those documents are mine, and I need to have them with me. They are proof of my identity and my property. You can't keep them." He looked at me with that expression he now constantly used with me, a mix of impatience and condescension. "Mom, you won't have a safe place to keep such important documents in the small apartment. At my house, they'll be in a safe, protected from fire and theft. In a safe that I would have no access to, under the complete control of David and, by extension, Jessica. It was the final step to complete my dispossession. First the house, then my financial independence, and finally my legal documents. They were turning me into a person without papers, without rights, completely dependent on their goodwill. Jessica watched the whole scene with ill-disguised satisfaction. "He's right, Helen. It's much better for David to keep your important documents. That way you don't have to worry about a thing. You just have to enjoy your new life without responsibilities." Without responsibilities. In Jessica's vocabulary, that phrase was synonymous with without rights, without power, without the ability to decide about my own life. It was the perfect euphemism to describe the state of total dependence to which they wanted to reduce me. Without responsibilities was the perfect euphemism to describe the state of total dependence they wanted to reduce me to. As David packed my documents into a box he would take to his house, I felt as if they were erasing my legal existence, as if they were turning me into a person invisible to the law. Without deeds, property titles, or insurance policies, I couldn't prove in any court that this house belonged to me. At that decisive moment, I heard a knock at the door. It was Sharon again, but this time she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by Mark, David's lawyer friend, who had apparently decided to come in person to assess the situation after the phone calls he had received. David became visibly nervous at the sight of Mark, knowing he couldn't maintain the facade of a consensual decision in front of someone with legal knowledge. Mark entered the house and surveyed the chaos of the move with professional eyes. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said with a politeness that didn't hide his concern. "David, Sharon has told me a few things that seem very strange. I'd like to speak with Helen alone to understand exactly what's happening here." Jessica immediately stepped forward with her rehearsed smile. "Oh, Mark, so good of you to come. You can see for yourself that we're just helping Helen with a move she wanted to make herself. Everything is very organized and planned for her well-being." Mark looked at her with the expression lawyers reserve for people trying to manipulate them with weak arguments. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I didn't come to speak with you. I came to speak with the owner of this house, who I understand is Helen. And I would like to do so without interference from third parties." David tried to intervene. "Mark, there's no need to dramatize the situation. Everything is in order. My mom will be much better off in the apartment." Mark raised a hand to silence David. "David, you're my friend, but as a lawyer, I have a duty to ensure that the rights of an older adult are not being violated. Helen, I need you to tell me in your own words if you want to move out of this house, or if you are being pressured to do so." It was the first time all day that someone had asked me directly what my wishes were. The first time someone had addressed me as the person with the right to make decisions about my own life. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling but clear, "I do not want to move. This is my house. I built it with 30 years of work. I came home from taking care of my sick sister to find they had already decided to kick me out of my own home." Jessica tried to interrupt. "Mark, you see, Helen has been very confused lately. She's had episodes of memory loss and—" Mark cut her off with authority. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you not to speak while I'm taking Helen's statement. If you have something to contribute, you can do so later." Sharon came over and stood by my side in a gesture of moral support. "Mark, I've been Helen's neighbor for over 20 years. I can assure you that she is perfectly lucid and capable of making her own decisions. What is happening here is elder abuse disguised as care. Mark nodded and continued his questions. Helen, is this house deeded in your name? Yes, it is. I have all the papers to prove it. But my son is taking them, he says, to protect them. But I think it's so I can't prove the house is mine. Mark looked at David sternly. David, I hope you're not going to tell me you're confiscating your mother's legal documents. David turned red and began to stammer excuses. It's not confiscating, Mark. It's protecting. There's no safe place to keep such important documents in the small apartment. Mark shook his head. David, that is not your decision to make. The documents belong to your mother, and she has the right to keep them in her possession or decide where to store them. Kevin, who had been watching the confrontation from the stairs, approached with a defiant attitude. Hey, lawyer, you don't know the whole situation. Helen can't live alone anymore. She's had several minor accidents and significant memory lapses. It's dangerous to leave her in such a big house. Mark looked at him coldly. And who are you to opine on Helen's capacity? Are you her doctor, her psychologist, her social worker? Kevin was intimidated by the direct question. Well, I'm David's brother-in-law, and… Exactly, Mark interrupted. You have no legal authority whatsoever to determine this woman's capacity. Jessica tried to regain control of the situation. Mark, I understand your concern, but we acted in good faith. The apartment is already paid for, the furniture is already packed. It would be very complicated to cancel everything now. Mark looked at her with an expression that brooked no argument. Ma'am, good faith does not justify violating a person's rights. If Helen does not want to move, she is not moving. Period. David approached in desperation. Mark, please, don't make this harder than it already is. My wife is pregnant. We need the house to raise our child. We can't keep living in that tiny apartment. Mark looked at him with disappointment. David, I understand you want to provide the best for your family, but you can't do it at the expense of your mother's rights. If you need a bigger house, find one and buy it with your own money. Sharon intervened at the perfect moment. Mark, there's something else you should know. Helen told me she lent this woman $5,000 6 months ago, and now she's denying it was a loan. They're saying it was a gift to avoid paying it back. Mark turned to me with renewed interest. Helen, is that true about the loan? Yes, it is. I lent Jessica $5,000 to help with Kevin's business, but we didn't sign any papers because I trusted my family's word. Now they're saying it was a gift and they won't pay me back. Jessica became very nervous. Mark, that's not true. Helen is confusing things. She said herself it was a gift to support the family. Mark stared at her. Ma'am, $5,000 is a very significant amount for a person on a pension. I find it very strange that someone would gift that amount without a very special reason. At that moment, Sharon took out her cell phone with a triumphant smile. Mark, it turns out I have a recording that might clear a lot of things up. Everyone in the room fell silent, especially Jessica, who turned as pale as a ghost. Sharon continued to explain. You see, Mark, my kitchen window looks directly into Helen's backyard, and a few weeks ago I heard a very interesting conversation. Sharon played the recording on her phone, and Jessica's voice came through clearly. Kevin, we're almost set. The old woman leaves next week to take care of her sister, and those 3 weeks will be perfect to convince David that his mom can't live alone anymore. I'll take care of filling his head with all the reasons why it would be better for her to leave the house. Kevin's voice responded on the recording. And what are you going to do about the money she lent you? Jessica laughed. That money doesn't exist anymore, bro. It was invested in the business and lost. Besides, if the old woman ends up without a house, she's going to need all her money to survive. She won't be in any position to claim loans that, according to us, never existed. The silence in the room was sepulchral. Jessica and Kevin looked at each other in horror, knowing they had been completely exposed. David was in shock, finally seeing his wife's true face. Mark smiled with professional satisfaction. Well, I believe this recording clarifies a great deal about these individuals' true intentions. Jessica desperately tried to discredit the evidence. That recording is taken out of context. We were just joking. We weren't serious. Mark shook his head. Ma'am, a conspiracy to strip an elderly person of her home and her money is not a joke. It is a serious crime that can have very severe criminal consequences. David finally found his voice, but now it was directed at his wife with disbelief and pain. Jessica, is everything on that recording true? You planned all of this from the beginning. You lied to me about my mother. You manipulated me into acting against her. David stared at Jessica with a mixture of horror and disillusionment I had never seen in his eyes. It was as if a blindfold he had worn for years had finally been removed, and he could see reality for the first time. Jessica, desperate to maintain control, tried to approach him with crocodile tears in her eyes. Honey, it's not what it looks like. I only wanted what was best for us, for our baby. Your mom really does need special care, and… David cut her off with a voice I didn't recognize, a voice full of long, suppressed fury. Enough with the lies, Jessica. How many times have you manipulated me? How many times have you filled my head with lies about my mother? Mark seized the moment to take legal control of the situation. David, as a family lawyer and your friend, I have to tell you that your wife and her brother could face criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and financial abuse of an elder. This recording is sufficient evidence to file a formal complaint. Kevin, who had been quiet since the recording started, tried to slip out the door, but Sharon blocked his path. Not so fast, young man. You're not leaving until this is completely resolved. Helen deserves to get her money and her dignity back. Kevin glared at her, but he no longer had the intimidating power he had before. Lady, you can't stop me. I'm not a prisoner. Mark intervened with legal authority. Indeed, you can leave, but I recommend you don't leave town because you will likely be subpoenaed by the authorities very soon. The crime of fraud and conspiracy against the elderly is very serious in this state. Jessica clung to David's arm in desperation. David, please, think about our baby. If you report me, our son will be born with his mother in jail. Is that what you want for your family? David pulled away from her grasp with an expression of disgust. Don't manipulate me with the baby anymore, Jessica. If you had thought about him before planning this scam, we wouldn't be in this situation. Sharon took my arm with motherly affection. Helen, now comes the best part. These freeloaders are going to pay for what they did to you, but you have to be strong and report them formally. You can't let them get away with it. I nodded, feeling for the first time all day that I had real allies, people who cared about my well-being without ulterior motives. Mark approached me with a folder he had brought. Helen, I need you to give me all the details of the loan you made. Do you remember the exact date, the amount, the payment method? Any detail you can remember will be helpful in building the case. Yes, Mark, I said. It was March 15th. I withdrew exactly $5,000 from my savings account at the National Bank and gave it to Jessica in cash right here, in this room. Perfect, Mark said, taking notes. The bank will have a record of that transaction, and that will be additional evidence. We'll also need testimony from neighbors about your character and about any suspicious behavior they may have observed from Mrs. Jessica and her brother. David sat on the stairs with his head in his hands, completely defeated. I can't believe I was so blind. My mother was right about Jessica from the beginning, but I didn't want to listen. How could I betray the woman who gave me everything in life like this? I approached my son, and despite all the pain he had caused me, I felt compassion for him. Son, I said softly, you were also a victim of her manipulations. Jessica is very skilled at making people see reality the way it suits her. The important thing now is that you know the truth and you can make the right decisions. David looked at me with tears in his eyes. Mom, can you forgive me? I was a terrible son to you. Jessica, seeing that she had completely lost control over David, switched tactics and tried to appeal directly to my compassion. Helen, please, think about your grandchild. If you report me, this baby will grow up without his mother. You, who are so good, so understanding, surely you wouldn't want that for an innocent child. Mark looked at her sternly. Ma'am, you are again trying to manipulate the victim using emotional blackmail. That only worsens your legal situation. I suggest you remain silent and find a lawyer for your defense instead of continuing to dig your own grave. Sharon clapped with satisfaction. Mark, you are an angel sent from heaven. If you hadn't come today, these scoundrels would have gotten away with it completely. Helen would have lost her house, her money, and her dignity. Mark smiled modestly. Mrs. Johnson, you were the one who really saved the situation. Without your recording, it would have been very difficult to prove these people's true intentions. Kevin, who had remained near the door looking for a chance to escape, finally exploded with his true personality. This is ridiculous. Some nosy old woman records private conversations, and now everyone's acting like we're criminals. Helen is too old to manage such a big house. We were doing her a favor. His words confirmed everything Mark needed to hear. Young man, you have just admitted that you believe Helen lacks the capacity to make her own decisions, which is exactly the mindset that leads to elder abuse. And as for recording conversations in a private yard from an adjacent property, that is completely legal. David stood up and began to unpack the boxes he had packed with my belongings. Mom, I'm going to put all your things back where they belong. This is your house, and it will always be your house. Jessica approached with one last, desperate attempt. David, you can't do this. We need this house for our son. We won't have enough space in the apartment. David looked at her with a coldness he had never shown her before. Jessica, you were the one who decided to destroy this family with your lies and manipulations. Now you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. You can find a bigger apartment with your own money, but this house belongs to my mother. Mark began to explain my legal options. Helen, you can file a criminal complaint for fraud and conspiracy, and you can also sue civilly for the money they stole plus damages. I recommend you do both to ensure that complete justice is served. Sharon offered to be a witness. Mark, I will testify about everything I've seen and heard over the years. Jessica has been gradually isolating David from his mother, filling his head with lies and creating conflicts where there were none. It's a very clear pattern of behavior. Jessica tried one last manipulation directed at me. Helen, if you report me, David will suffer a lot. It will be very painful for him to see the mother of his child in jail. Do you really want to cause that pain to your own son? Mark interrupted her immediately. Ma'am, I'm warning you that continuing to try to manipulate the victim could be considered witness intimidation, which is another crime. I looked at Jessica with a mixture of pity and determination. Jessica, I had 5 years to get to know your true personality, but I always tried to keep the family peace. I see now that was a mistake on my part. If you don't face the consequences of your actions now, you will continue to hurt other people in the future. David took my house keys from the table and handed them to me solemnly. Mom, these are your keys to your house, where you will always be welcome and respected. I'm going to make sure that Jessica and Kevin face the legal consequences of what they did. I will no longer be an accomplice to their abuse. As Mark prepared the documents for the formal complaint and Sharon organized the evidence she had gathered, I sat in my favorite armchair, the very one I had been on the verge of losing forever. For the first time in many hours, I felt at peace, knowing that justice would finally prevail and that my home was safe.